She thought calling the cops would fix everything. But what happened on that dock changed her forever.
The lake was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that made you feel like the world had paused just long enough for you to hear your own thoughts. Sunlight filtered through the tall pine trees, reflecting off the water's smooth surface. The dock creaked gently underfoot as Thomas Bradford stepped forward, one hand on his hip, the other resting protectively on the shoulder of his 6-year-old daughter, Lily. He was smiling, not out of mockery, but with the disbelieving laughter of someone who had just witnessed something so absurd, so completely outside the bounds of reason, that all he could do was laugh. Across from him, standing on a cluster of boulders that framed the edge of the lake, Margaret Holloway pointed a trembling finger in his direction. Her voice was sharp, her words slicing through the calm like broken glass, each syllable fueled by a lifetime of entitlement and suppressed rage. She wore a light pink blazer, a powder blue blouse tucked into her khaki shorts, and her expression was twisted in a mix of outrage and desperation. Behind her stood a sign, handmade and crudely painted in red and blue, calling cops won't bring HOA back. The sign was her final stand, a visual protest against the collapse of the homeowners association that once governed the lakeside community with an iron fist. Recoil Creek had long been the summer haven for families who could afford it, a pristine wilderness dotted with meticulously regulated cabins and manicured docks. That was, until the Recoil Cabin Stories YouTube channel launched Thomas's brainchild, a project that started as a tribute to his late wife, documenting life on the lake through immersive storytelling. What began as a quiet way to cope with grief had turned into a global sensation. With every upload, the channel gained tens of thousands of subscribers. Viewers from around the world tuned in not only for the scenic beauty of Recoil Creek, but for the heartfelt tales Thomas told, stories that often blurred the line between fiction and personal memory. Some were based on local legends, others entirely made up, but all were delivered with the calm, hypnotic voice of a man who had turned his pain into art, and that art had consequences. Margaret, once the HOA president and self-declared protector of Recoil Creek's character, saw the videos as an invasion. She believed that Thomas was commercializing the community, turning their peaceful haven into a tourist magnet. The real blow came when the HOA voted to disband after a series of viral videos exposed just how deeply divided the community had become. Thomas hadn't even meant to air their dirty laundry, but when one episode filmed during a particularly heated community meeting leaked to his subscribers, the internet did the rest. It wasn't long before Margaret became the symbol of everything wrong with elite, overbearing community leadership. Memes were made, comments flooded in. Some cheered her downfall, others mocked her relentlessly. And through it all, Thomas never once named her. He didn't need to. The internet had already done the work. Now she stood on the rocks, furious, humiliated, and desperate to reclaim something that had long slipped from her fingers. Her eyes, once filled with steely confidence, now darted between the 3 police officers who stood awkwardly behind her. They weren't there to arrest Thomas. In fact, they weren't quite sure why they had been called at all. One of them, Officer Ramirez, leaned against the cabin's porch railing, arms folded, waiting for the situation to resolve itself without incident. "You call this parenting?" Margaret shouted, jabbing her finger again. "This is psychological warfare against my grieving child?" Thomas's smile faltered just slightly. He glanced down at Lily, who clung to his leg, confused but not frightened. He knelt beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "She's not grieving," he said softly, "not for Margaret's benefit, but for his own. She's healing." Margaret scoffed, throwing her arms in the air. "Healing? You're exploiting her. All of this, your little stories, your dramatic introspections, it's nothing but a self-serving fantasy." Thomas stood again, calm and composed. "It's therapy," he said simply. "And what about the community?" Margaret barked. "The HOA was the last defense we had against chaos. Now anyone with a camera and a sob story can just come here and turn this place into content." "People come here," Thomas replied, "because they want to feel something real. Not because I told them to, because this place speaks for itself." The officers exchanged glances. None of them moved to intervene. Officer Ramirez finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Ma'am," he said, gently but firmly, "there's no law against making YouTube videos. And from what I've seen, Mr. Bradford hasn't violated any ordinances." Margaret turned to him, her voice rising in pitch.